Here I'm making Kouign Amann, a pastry from the French region of Brittany. In Breton, the name literally means butter cake, which turns out to be a very accurate description. To make the dough, we'll need some flour, yeast, salt, sugar, and melted butter. We'll also need 2 sticks of softened butter later on, but it isn't technically a part of the dough. The first thing you do is mix the water and yeast together so that the yeast dissolves. Then add the flour, salt, and melted butter and mix it a bit until it comes together. You've mixed the dough enough when it turns into a little ball like this. Now you have to let it rise and relax for a couple hours, so go ride your bike or something. It's a nice day outside. Once it's risen, roll it out into a rectangle. It'll be tough and elastic right now, so it's going to take some effort to stretch it out sufficiently. This process and the steps that follow are very similar to the making of puff pastry. Now you spread the softened butter I mentioned earlier over half the dough. In Brittany, you'd use salted butter. They're right by the coast, so they make a type of butter with sea salt that is apparently delicious. Somehow, I didn't think my generic supermarket salted butter would meet those standards, so I'm using unsalted butter, which is generally better for baking. You may also notice I'm using my hands to smear the butter. I have no idea why I'm doing this, but the cookbook was very specific about using your hands for it. Maybe it's just easier than using a knife, although it doesn't seem like that when your hands are so covered in butter that multiple scrubbings with dish soap can't get it all off. Now you fold the dough in half and flour both sides. It's important for both the dough and the rolling pin to be well floured, since the butter in the dough has a tendency to make it sticky. After that, just roll out the dough again like so. And give it a fold into thirds. Rotate it 90 degrees and do the whole thing again, which is called turning the dough. This process is slow since the dough is still elastic, but it creates tons of tiny layers. This is also why it's important to flour your dough well. The thin top layers will catch on the rolling pin otherwise. Anyway, these layers will puff up in the oven and make the finished product extremely flaky because the butter turns to steam when heated. At least that's what's supposed to happen. I've had plenty of pastries, like my croissants, where this has not occurred, although it worked in this case. You now have to let the dough rest for about half an hour. This lets the gluten in the dough relax and makes it easier to roll out. After the dough has rested, roll it out once more. Once it's rolled out, sprinkle sugar over it. Then do as before, fold it into thirds and rotate. You do the same thing with the other half of the sugar. Sprinkle it onto rolled out dough and perform another fold into thirds. This ensures that the entire pastry will be saturated with sugar that will caramelize as it bakes. We have to rest the dough again, then roll it out into a ribbon like so. We're actually making the individual cakes now, so you just cut it into squares like this. I'm using such a large knife not because I'm needlessly violent toward baked goods, but because any knife you use needs to be sharp so as to cut through the layers without crushing them. To shape the pastries, just fold over all 4 corners into the center and cover it in sugar, which means it'll have a caramelized crust as well. Notice in this close-up all the layers in the pastry. That's from all the folding and rolling I did before. Keep going like that, folding in the corners, sort of shaping the bottom into a circle and coating it in sugar until you've got a full pan. If anybody was wondering, my muffin tin looks a bit odd because it's 100% silicone, so it's flexible. This means I can bend the cups and get recalcitrant pastries out, which in this case is very useful. You have to let these rise for about an hour, but then you just can bake them. These look nice, but they should be darker. What I took as burning was just the sugar browning and caramelizing. However, these are delicious either way, so be sure to make them if you can. There's nothing quite like them. I mean, they're practically made out of butter and sugar, so you know they'd have to be good.